Hey everyone, welcome. My name is Katie Ray. We've got a fabulous webinar for y'all today. I'm so excited to have Russell here from Showpad, and we'll get into the intros in a bit. But as you are coming in, make sure you go to your chat, tell us where you're coming from. Make sure your to is to panelists and attendees. So everyone wants to know where you're coming from. I am coming from Fort Worth, Texas. Like always, we had a little bit of snow, but not near as much snow as you did, Russell. Where are you coming from?
Longmont, Colorado, just outside of the ski resort. It's about an hour outside of Boulder. So yeah, we've got a bit of
Awesome.
snow out here. Great ski weather.
That's great. Yeah, we were supposed to get like maybe 2 inches of snow in Fort Worth, which doesn't ever happen. And actually, I used Time Hop to keep track of my memories on social media, and it's fun to look at every so often. And this time last year, we actually had snow on the exact same day, but it actually stuck a little bit. So, Ron, you probably know, you probably got some snow, but it wasn't near as much as I expected. Now, West Texas got like a couple feet. So that's definitely more like Denver, Colorado snow. So glad that stayed on the west of Texas where I am not. So I can't
Yeah,
drive
Katie,
in snow.
Katie, we're seeing a lot of folks in the Northeast. I definitely know Maine, New Hampshire get it. Boy, we
Oh
have
yeah.
Kenya here. I don't know if Kenya has ever gotten snow, so that would be probably quite shocking. So great to see we're getting a global audience joining here. Megan Hill from Castle Rock. Great to see a fellow Coloradan joining up here.
Montreal. We've got,
Oh,
yeah,
it's
that's one of my favorite things about Sales Hackers. We've got community members all over the world. I think it's the coolest thing. So, Melanie, you're coming in from Maui. I bet it's beautiful
ah,
there right now.
I'd love some sun. That would be great.
That sounds really nice. Yeah, we've got a little bit of sun, but still a little bit cold. If you want to throw your LinkedIn into the chat as well, so we can all connect with each other, you're more than welcome to. We're going to wait for about another minute or so. I know people are still coming in, and we'll get started once we kind of get through that. But I'm really excited today. This is probably one of my favorite webinars that we've done in a bit. So I'm really excited to share this with you all. And Russell's got a lot of fun stuff, good movie references. So if you are a movie buff, like I am attempting to become, you should definitely be excited because we've got everything for you as far as movie references. Going all the way, what? Some of the references 90s? Is that when some of the movies came out?
Oh, a little bit earlier than that, Katie, which is fine. Listen, we're all streaming now during this pandemic. And if you can't stream, go to your local library. They've got plenty of DVDs. So that's one thing. That's my quick hack of the day. Is if you can't find any of these movies on your streaming service, check your local library. Tons and tons of DVDs they typically have. So a fun little secret there. But yeah, Katie, I'm excited about this. This should be a lot of fun. And again, I'm hoping to have this be interactive. We're going to do a couple polls in here. I'm going to try to guide the conversation based on what the poll responses are. So your responses are going to be helpful as we get a lot of attendees jumping in here and people participating. So we want this to be valuable to you. So ask questions, jump in. And again, we want this you walking away a little bit entertained, a little bit have some of that insight and actionable things that you can take out. And I was talking to Katie about this. I've got a different style for trying to deliver this. I don't want this to be like your traditional, corporate lecture or something you'd find in a classroom setting. This is going to be a little bit of a fun perspective on how do we rethink our sales enablement charter and how do we need to build it. So, Katie, I appreciate the rehearsals with you. We've done a couple dry runs with it already, and you've provided some great tips there. So thank you for that.
I'm excited. Well, it is about 1:04. We're going to kind of go over a few format things before we get going. And then, as you said, Russell, we will light the candle. So that's become my new favorite saying. I love it. It will be forever something I say. But yeah, so my name is Katie Ray. I'm the Community Events and Engagement Manager at Sales Hacker. We're so excited to help bring this webinar and all this great information in partnership with Showpad. And we've got Russell Wurth here, who is the Global VP of Sales Enablement for Showpad. So he knows his stuff. So it's going to be really good. Just a few housekeeping things. One, the recording for this webinar will be sent within 24 hours of the event. So I know that gets asked every single time. You will be able to have access to it. You will get an email. Now, you can either access it from the email we sent you, Or go to saleshacker.com. On the little bar under the main name, you'll be able to see training and events. Click on that and you'll see upcoming events in addition to on-demand workshops. That's where you'll also be able to find the recordings. Or you can also go to YouTube and check us out there and see all of the recordings there. So 3 different ways you're going to get it. Promise you, you will get this. I know you're going to want to rewatch this multiple times. Secondly, on the bottom bar next to raise hand and Q&A box, you want to click on the Q&A box. Any question you have, you throw it in there. We want to hear from you. We want to know what's working, what's not working, questions that you may have, anything at all, you throw it in there. I'm going to be moderating it the whole time and stopping Russell anytime we've got questions. And we'll just go from there. So once again, we've got Russell Wurth with us, and I'm going to let him kind of give him a little background about himself, and then we're just going to jump into this. How's that sound?
That sounds great. And by the way, the light this candle reference came from Alan Shepard as he was sitting on a rocket and asking if we're ready to go, which, you know, you had to lighten the mood. I always try to use that to lighten the mood because we're not sitting in a rocket with all this jet fuel that could potentially explode and kill us. So it's just a way to kind of lighten it up as we do something, you know, launching something pretty big and exciting. So little fun reference there, a little bit of movie history. That's a cool one. A little bit of history. All right. So I think, Katie, we're starting with a poll, right? Before we jump in, I'm going to make our audience do a little bit of work before I have to do some work here, kind of talking about Sales Enablement Charter. So do we have this pop up again? Do you have a formal... Excellent. Do you have a formal charter today that has an executive sponsor?
Oh, there. Gotcha. Now, and for those of us who don't know what a formal charter is, can you give us a little details, just a brief little snippet of what that is? Because I know we're going to get into that a little bit more today.
You bet. So when I mean formal charter, I mean something that your executive sponsor is behind. It kind of gives you that license to hunt, that authorization and authority to go get some things done. And that's really what we're going to talk about today, because enablement's always hard. You got to form a team across product, sales, marketing, many other dimensions. And so the hard part is getting that charter defined. The second part is now evangelizing, getting that team together, rowing in the same direction. That's what we're going to talk about today.
Perfect. I'm going to give it about 10 more seconds or so. A lot of people are other. So if you put other, throw in the chat, why? What does other mean to you? Is it just someone in a different, you know, are they in marketing? Where are they? Okay, we've got CEO. Interesting. Cool. Let's see. If you also put other, I know there's about almost 40 of you that put other in there. Cool. Board members, or you don't have a formal charter. Okay.
I was just going to say that. So other is probably a lot of folks that don't have a formal charter, because typically you want somebody at the C level or SVP level that either has budget or access to budget. So my guess is that that option there, if it's an other, that they may not have that formal charter in place, you know, that they were hired to kind of help solve some quick friction points, which is fine. That's how a lot of people get started, you know, and that's what we're going to talk about today, is how do we get into this and get going and growing.
Perfect. Well, I just stopped the poll and it is sharing. So everyone take a look at this. The majority is other. So I'm excited for everyone to be able to figure out what they need to do to really kind of up their game with this charter today.
Yeah. And you know, what's interesting, you know, I see a decent amount of people in sales now. What we traditionally think of, it's going to be in sales under the CRO. There's still a lot of folks, you know, you're in CMO land or you're in the COO, primarily because those two groups, more than the CRO and head of sales, they have budget, they have access to spending, they've invested in people and tools in the past. And so we're going to talk about how we need to bridge that gap, because ultimately, I think we can agree sales, the CRO, the head of sales, they're the primary beneficiary of a sales enablement program. It's about increasing the effectiveness of their team, predictable profitability, as I always like to say. That's what sales always wants. It's predictable. We know what's coming in the pipeline and it's profitable. So well, let's jump right in. So one thing I wanted to do, Katie, is talk a little bit about my background. You know, I do a little bit of speaking and whatnot, but it's gotten me to a unique place, and everybody's going to have a fantastically unique story. And I think that's what makes sales enablement such an interesting practice, is because there's no one clear path on how did you get there. You know, people kind of more often than not fall into sales enablement. And a bit of that happened to me. You know, I was an engineer with 10 years of software development experience. I was, again, one of those guys in the back room coding away when Y2K flipped over and we were waiting for catastrophe to occur. But as I evolved, I kind of became this geek with a personality, as my CEO liked to call me. And I got moved into sales engineering and product marketing as we were launching a new product. And I realized I really enjoyed helping sales, because salespeople, they were trying really hard to get to sell more faster. And I didn't really appreciate sales and marketing until I had to do it. We were a startup company. I set up a booth at a show and I was expecting all these great things to happen as an engineer. And I didn't realize there's a lot of work to be done on the marketing side and on the sales side. So my foray into product marketing led into sales enablement before it was a thing. We were producing all these great materials, putting it out to sales, but they couldn't access it. They didn't know how to use it. So I spent a lot of time understanding sales, marketing, operations, and engineering. And if I could offer any career advice to anybody looking to get deeper here, just think about the Rosetta Stone, a way to translate into multiple languages. Spend time with different departments in sales, marketing, ops, and engineering, and how you can orchestrate those different departments for success. And that's what we're going to talk about briefly. Again, just a quick thing about my perspective on enablement. And I kind of use this term broadly because it could be sales enablement, it could be revenue enablement, but it's really sales enablement expanding into revenue enablement for SaaS-based companies, especially because it's anything to do with how do we help the company more efficiently drive revenue. There's lots of accountability with enablement, but not a lot of authority. As I talked about, we need to get budgets from marketing, sales, and other departments. Primarily, that's why it sits under sometimes marketing or operations. They have budget or they have a bit of authority, but really it's that accountability to sales that we got to be thinking about. So all that accountability, how do we drive authority? It's that team orchestration that's required. How do we see the big picture in revenue across a lot of different departments, bring together that talent from other teams, and define the programs and content for sales readiness and effectiveness, and ensure that the sales and revenue team is not overwhelmed with what we're giving them. Because we can't just continuously do things, throw it over the wall, doing WebExes and Zoom, people get fatigued. So we got to think about this as a team sport. And so that's where we had a little bit of fun here, Katie. I think you enjoyed this, and I hope everybody else out in the audience does as well. But I was thinking a lot about this, and enablement really is a team sport. And you got to think about this person, leading the charge, but they're here kind of looking back on the team, not as a manager, but as a coach. A manager, they manage headcounts and budgets and projects and spreadsheets, but a coach is looking at the team and how do we get optimal performance. And for enablement, I think we could probably put a poll up. Do we have enough staff to do our job? No. So we have to think about how do we get the right team in place. And it's that coordinated effort, whereas coaches, we've got to define what's the goal and how do we recruit others from marketing or operations or product to help us row in that direction and get there as fast as possible. But again, the ultimate goal here with this team working together isn't necessarily for the team to perform, it's to help the sales team perform or the revenue teams perform. But it first starts with that enablement team and the enablement function. So every time as I'm talking today about the enablement team, let's make sure we're thinking broader. It's not just the people that report to the enablement departments. It's about how do we get others kind of excited and wanting to be part of the enablement function. So Katie, I think I've done a pretty good job. Can I recruit you to be on the enablement team here?
Hey, all these pictures, I don't know, man. Maybe, just maybe. All the movie references. Well, and I think something that you talked about that's really interesting too, and I love that you're emphasizing this for today's discussion, is it's how do we generate revenue? And I think as sellers, it's really easy for us to remember that. But as sales enablement, it can be very challenging to pick and choose what events we're having our sellers do to generate revenue, right? We've all fallen privy to, oh, you have to do all these reports and all this extra stuff, but does it generate revenue? Well, no, but I saw it on a webinar, so I'm going to do it. And it looked cool and like innovative. But at the bottom line, what is that doing for the team? And how do I coach up our members and everyone in the organization? I think is a very pivotal thing for us to really hone in on today.
Yeah. And Katie, you bring up a good point, because thinking about enablements and sales as a sport and team function in any sport, there's not just a simple thing, how do I do better at basketball, score more baskets, but there's 50 things that go into that with regards to footwork, leg work, jumping, running, endurance, agility, ball handling, so you can't fix 50 things at once. I try to golf. I'm not a great golfer, but I try to golf. And I remember when I first tried to do this, my friend tried to give me 50 tips at once, and he was a good friend. He meant well, but it wasn't until somebody looked at how I was performing as a golfer today and said, you know what, here's 2 things you need to focus on. Start here and then do these other things. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I wanted to put it in the sports analogy because you may not be a sports fan. These may not resonate with you, but think about it in context of, again, human performance and how there's always a million things we could tweak and adjust. But part of that charter is figuring out where we're at today in terms of maturity and where we want to go, and what are the few things we're going to focus on, which is important, and the things we're not going to focus on just yet. And so I like this because instead of trying to invent something new, I've done some research on this over the past couple of years. I really like Tuckman's stages of group development. That's where this comes from. Lots of psychology went into this to think about how teams form. This is less about that manager managing a team. It's more about the coach leading a team, leading the function. So when we look at it as a team sport in various maturity levels, I'm going to take you through this journey to think about forming, where the team acquaints and establishes ground rules, the storming stage where they start to communicate feelings and think of themselves still as individuals, but part of a bigger team. And then we move on to norming, where they're part of the big team, they realize what they want to achieve, and they can accept other viewpoints. And then finally, where we get to that performing, where everybody's part of that team, they realize they can really achieve that work if they accept other viewpoints and get the best out of the entire team and not just thinking about individuals. So I really like this as an approach. And there was a question that came in here. So I'm trying to scan on the chats. Why is there a dip at storming? Again, this is just the theory. It doesn't happen to anybody, but it happens because at forming, everybody's kind of coming together and you may get some quick activity. So there is a bit of effectiveness as you first come together. But when you start reaching that storming, you're kind of communicating those feelings, as we see here, that you still see individuals and part of the team. So you take a little bit of a hit in terms of effectiveness, because at that point, you've had a couple quick wins. Now you're starting to maybe get a bit of a pause as we think about the big picture. If you read any change management books by John Cotter or others, this is very, very normal. Anytime you're doing anything with change management, always expect a quick win followed by a bit of a regression, but you got to kind of power on and push through. This even happens with a diet. Week 2, week 3 in the diet, that's the place we're starting to crave a bacon cheeseburger, but we can't do it. We got to power on. So you almost take that hit there as well. So it happens with a lot of things. And again, this is from, if you just look for Tuckman's stages of group development, you'll see a lot of great research in this area. So without further ado, let's jump in, Katie. So again, keep me honest. We're going to talk about the forming stage. Again, how do we get started? Think about where you're at as a team. And I wanted to bring up some sports analogies, but things that would resonate with folks. So I grabbed some movies. Hopefully people saw these as they're staying at home, watching DVDs or watching streaming movies. So thank you, Katie, for popping that one in there. That's great. So you can follow along at home. So A League of Their Own. This is my wife's favorite movie. This is a 1992 movie, but it was about 1943. World War II shut down baseball, so the owners had to gather and start a women's league. It's a fantastic movie. As I mentioned, my wife's a sports nut. She's a softball player, so really enjoyed this because at this stage, the team's just getting acquainted, getting some ground rules. There's some formalities that are preserved, and members are treated as strangers, because you're just coming together. So as they're coming together, kind of what's going on. You get together, you realize you've got this goal, which is great because we've just formed, but management's out there, just like this scene, giving mixed signals because management may not be on the same plane. They've got different charters, and this is where a charter starts to become important. You may not have a chance to put one together here, but this is where it starts becoming evidence that you need a charter because you're getting mixed signals from management in terms of what the team needs to do at specific stages and doing specific things. Every enablement practitioner I talk to that's at this stage definitely feels this. There's a lot of dirty jobs to get done. We're doing a lot of things that are unnatural, may seem like they're outside of the game, but we just got to kind of jump in and do those things. And there's not a lot of overall success here. We might have some quick wins, but just like in the movie, there's no crying in baseball. There's no crying in enablement. We just need to kind of power through it. It's one of my favorite scenes that the coach is just struggling here to communicate his goals and plans to some ladies that have just never done this before. But if you press on, you'll see that you've got some heroes that are going to emerge here, that they're going to really help you get to the next level. And that's kind of where we need to latch on to that. So that's kind of a quick preview of what forming might look like. Now, when we think about storming, this is one of my favorite sports movies, Hoosiers. It's 1951 and an outsider arrives in a small basketball team in Indiana to try to get the team back to where they once were. And so again, back to enablement, what's our analogy in terms of storming? We're starting to push boundaries here. The coach comes in and he creates some friction because he's having people do exercises and drills they haven't done before. It was simply unheard of. He comes in, he's got them dribbling around chairs, he's got them doing one-on-one role play exercises, but the team is very frustrated because all they've ever done is drills, shooting drills and scrimmage drills, but they lack the fundamentals. So this is where we might take that step back in that dip because we're trying to get to some fundamentals. We're trying to establish at the core, where are the biggest issues that we need to focus on as an enablement team. One of my favorite scenes in the movie is some unconventional things that are going on. The underhanded free throw. People probably haven't seen a basketball game where people are shooting free throws underhanded, but these are the kind of things that go on in enablement, those bad habits that might be out there that we want to try to uncover and correct. And as we're taking inventory of our charter and our goal, and along the way, you're going to have some friction. There's going to be some authority that's challenged to the team mission. You've got to go press on with your executive sponsor, ensuring they're supporting you among all the naysayers and doubters. Try to convert those skeptics that are out there at this stage. And the best way to do that is to think about metrics. This is where you're starting to measure. Again, one of my favorite scenes, the small Indiana basketball team goes to this giant gym and the coach says, look, let's measure the height of this rim. It's 10 feet, just like at home. Even though they're overwhelmed with the goal, he says, look, this is the same goal we've got back home. Score some buckets, let's get some wins. But that measurement can only come with a team. And I really like this as an analogy here, that it's not just one person that can get those metrics. A couple of people need to work together in terms of what they're going to measure. The next stage of team formation, again, another great movie I saw in my younger age, is The Mighty Ducks. I use this for Normie because clearly there's something normal happening here, repeatable patterns. They've got 3 movies. In fact, the movie was so successful, Disney bought an NHL team and called it the Ducks, for those that don't know. So this is clearly a norming stage because we've got some things that are repeatable and scalable. So with your enablement team, at this point, people have resolved their differences. We've understood each other's strengths. That authority is respected for the coach, and we know one another as we're working together as that team. Our team members are more comfortable asking for help and giving constructive feedback. We're being very honest at this stage because there is a stronger commitment to the team goals, and we can make good progress towards that. So what's this mean for sales enablement? This is where we start introducing things like processes and methodologies that I'll talk about a little bit later. Like the flying V formation that the coach taught the Ducks here, it's something they could do to beat the competition because they didn't have any counterattack to that. That's where our sales processes and methodologies coming in. And winning becomes a little bit easier at this stage because we're doing things at a norming stage. And so this is a really great stage to be, definitely where that charter starts proving its value. And the last stage is performing. A fantastic sports movie that, while this looks like a serious movie poster, this really is a fun movie. This takes place in 1971. It's a true story of Herman Boone. Fantastic story. He was a black head coach who took over a recently integrated high school in Virginia. And this was a really tough situation. He went through all these stages of team formation, but kind of getting to the end, what I really liked about it in terms of performing is the team's in a flow. They're performing to their full potential. Everybody's out there working hard with structured processes, because the team knows the goals they want to achieve. They know how to work hard. They know how to play hard. And at this stage, also, roles are becoming more fluid with other various members taking on different roles. There's a great scene with the assistant coach's daughter who's challenging the head coach's authority in his football knowledge. She's about as knowledge and bold in her football approach as the head coach. But there's a lot of fun at this stage too, because as the team's working together, they work hard, they also play hard. So some fantastic ways that they work together, resolving those differences, and you've got measurable performance at this stage, and you can achieve those goals to win. And so for all of these, again, in summary, the goal for teams is always do the best you can, get some of these processes down and win, but how do we break this down in enablement? So I'll spend some time on this next slide about how do we put all this stuff in context. So think about the team formation here: forming, storming, norming, performing. I took a stab at a couple of enablement domains that are pretty common out there that enablement people start into. Sales content management. How do we organize all of the content, slides, PDFs, videos, sales plays, and tools that sales needs? Sales readiness, where you've got onboarding, ongoing training and education, the coaching, the role play, and the messaging delivery. Sales effectiveness, where we're really diving deep into sales process and sales methodology, leveraging conversation intelligence and high impact coaching. And then lastly, buyer engagement, where you can really measure performance of, is the sales team and the sales people effective, delivering tailored content, creating high collaboration with the sales team and the customer. So with this out here, I think we've got another poll coming up, Katie. I'm going to leave this one up if that's okay, because I think we have the poll and the other question, but wanted to ask everybody, where do you feel like you're at today with your sales enablement maturity? Informing, storming, norming, and performing. And then we'll spend the rest of this session focusing on a couple of those areas, but just want to be able to talk about one of these maturity areas a little bit more than others if we have a heavy bias. So got the polls coming in. Any questions so far, Katie and team?
No, I think some of the curiosity lies with, one, I think you hit really well on whenever we're forming and we're like, something has to change. I think the poll is reflecting a lot of people are at that. A lot of people are like, oh my gosh, yeah, this is why, me and Rachel are butting heads all the time, is because we're really struggling and we both have different goals and what we're trying to accomplish. And when there's not that cohesiveness, there's that struggle. And ultimately that's the detriment of anyone who the sales enablement team works with, right? But I also think something that you mentioned, and I'd love to kind of tap into a little bit more of, is as we're norming, how do we know what expectations, or like, how do we know what we should be tracking necessarily? Because I know whenever we get to performing, we talked a lot about how you can actually track now and you can see like where your success lies. So how do you know what you should be tracking and what that looks like in real time?
Yeah, we'll get to that a little bit later because I'll talk about some of the elements of sales enablement programs and that feeds into our charter. Because again, we probably all want to jump to performing. I'm looking at the poll results here, and about 8% of the respondents are right at performing. So for those 4 folks, I'd love to ask you, and even folks in norming, definitely chime in because I'd love your perspective there. But I'll probably lean a little bit more focusing on the forming storming side of things, but I'll definitely mention some things to think about for norming and performing. And that's again where other teams come into play, because the hardest thing for an enablement practitioner to do is to try to measure everything on their own. And I'll talk about where we want to leverage sales operations and business operations to try to get some of those leading indicators and where this all kind of feeds into that sports analogy. So let's get into it. Katie, we're ready. Let's build a charter.
Awesome.
So hope this was helpful. Again, just wanted to have a little icebreaker kind of talking about sports, because again, if we think about enablement as a sport, we need that clear definition of what we're trying to achieve with executive support. So that's going to start with the goals, methods, metrics, and accountability and responsibility. The goals are, again, what do we want to try to achieve with sales enablement, tying to who is that executive sponsor. I saw a lot of respondents for CRO, but it's certainly the other could be HR. That's a team that also has had sales enablement because they want to focus on increasing ramp time, increasing retention, so they don't have such a burden on talent acquisition. So the best thing to do about that is start with your first draft. Again, we're going to talk about what are those goals, and we're going to go into the details here later, but who we're really targeting for the goals, methods, and metrics. But the reason we want this charter is that it gives you that license for action. If you have that executive sponsor, we want to be able to always point back to the charter to ask other teams to participate, just like that rowing example. Here's the place we're going. We all agreed we need to go there and that it's important. This is where we need to align our asks of the other teams and providing business benefits, not for the enablement team, it's for the company, for sales, marketing to drive revenue. And it helps us provide attribution and credit for that teamwork. Like you said, Katie, we want that attribution, not just for the enablement team in person, but the function overall and all the members. And we want to clarify what we're doing and not doing, that business needs change frequently. So we really need to think about how we align our charter to the cadence of sales. There's a lot of different things that go on at the beginning of the year versus beginning of the quarter, and the end of the year, end of the quarter. Right now, as an example, as we're ending out the year and the quarter for a lot of folks, everything's kind of focused on helping with customer references, testimonials, proof points, things that help close the deal and help the paper process along. For others that are starting their calendar year, it's all about building pipeline. How do we qualify, build, get some attention, and do a lot of things that fill in the funnel. So let's detail in what's in the charter. So we'll talk about this and break this down. These are the areas that are going to come next. We're going to talk about the format of the charter, who's that primary beneficiary, and what are the enablement programs that are going to deliver on that charter. As I mentioned before, it's the sales processes and methodologies, what we're doing for onboarding, if we've got a lot of hiring and ramping that we're doing, or dealing with a lot of churn, how we handle change management with new products, messaging, markets, campaigns in place. So with that, let's jump in on this first element. And one thing I've seen a lot, and I'd love to take for folks here, is we sometimes worry too much about the format of the charter. Do we want a template that's out there, whether it's a Word template or sheets or slides? My recommendation here is pick one that works with your executive sponsors. As you spend time with them, see how they communicate, see how they comment. For some of them, again, if it's a CRO, they're probably working very heavily in slides or sheets. If it's a CMO, they might be working more heavily in sheets or Word documents. So now that we've got cloud collaboration applications that are accessible to all, whether it's Office 365 or Google Sheets, think about that for those sponsors. What can they review, consume, and comment? And a lot of this is a bit of test. First, kind of see how they manage their overall plan and strategy, best aligned to that, because you want them to view this, you want them to comment on it, because you're going to need their support as you're evangelizing this to others to get them to drive and get interested in adoption. So think about what's the easiest for you to manage after that. This is where it gets a bit tricky because none of these tools are necessarily easy as a project management tool. And I highly suggest think about something else for project management if you can. Asana, Workday, we'll talk about some of those later that help for project management. But one thing that is tricky is to project manage out of these tools. It can be done. It's certainly doable for a lot of people that are very proficient at it. But the goal for the charter, again, is just to be a document that is updated about quarterly that just informs what's going on, what are you doing, what are the metrics, what have you done, how do we hit on those metrics, and where do we need to adapt for the next iteration. And finally, think about what's your company leveraging for cross-departmental programs. As I work for larger and larger companies and talk to the larger enterprises, more and more they're instituting frameworks for corporate programs because they're realizing that even though a department can have their own project plans, their own templates here, they're starting to get and adopt different broader programmatic frameworks to help them collaborate across teams. So I'm going to talk about 3 here in terms of those cross-departmental programs to help encourage you to research these as you're building your charter and think about those frameworks. And again, Katie, call me out if we've got any questions and if we need to pause and take a deeper dive there.
Will do.
So 3 of my favorites, again, these are different corporate-wide programs to think about in terms of a way to frame your charter. And this is OKR, Objectives and Key Results. This one starts with that company mission and understanding some of those midterm goals. So that company mission and midterm goals should be aligned to an enablement function that can drive revenue. And here it's a matter of getting a cadence in place about where you have planning and alignment of your objectives and key results, how you run weekly status meetings. After you deliver, what are those key metrics you're going to have after the fact? And then how you do that review. Oh, sorry, Katie. I think my Siri on my computer just clicked in. Did you
You're
lose
good.
me at all?
You're good. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
They're always listening.
I have keyboard challenges, and for whatever reason, the Siri just popped up and started transcribing. So think of OKR again. There are some templates out there, but this is about how do you run that cadence frequently to get that feedback and having that OKR coach that's looking at your objectives and key results. So this is a really good and useful tool for writing a charter. One of my favorites I've recently started using, this came from Salesforce.com. It's called V2MOM. And V2MOM stands for Vision, Values, Methods, Obstacles, and Measures. And again, as you're writing your charter, what's the vision that you want to achieve as an organization? Here it can be corporate vision, but this is going to be our enablement vision. What are the values you want to pursue? Will help you pursue that mission. What are the methods that you're going to see? This is where we detail out our enablement programs around process, methodology, content, readiness, and onboarding. Here it's critical for any program, always identify some of those obstacles and challenges that you need to overcome. And what are the measurements for success? And again, if you Google any of these like V2MOM, you'll find lots of examples and lots of templates. That's why I wanted to bring these to fruition, just to get the right ideas out there. There's no one size fits all here. So depending on your maturity, your industry, and what your company's doing, it's important to think about that. And lastly, I was a fan of this at really large companies because this really helps. And this is 4 Disciplines of Execution, a fantastic book that talks about how do we instill some of those goals? How do we focus on the wildly important? Think about acting on those lead measures, leading indicators that are going to drive that change. I think you mentioned this, Katie, that things that we know are going to drive pipeline, they're going to drive revenue. And then how do we keep that compelling scorecard and create that cadence of accountability? And so I think we see, I'm going to pause here after these 3. These 3 frameworks are much more similar than dissimilar. There's some slight nuance there, but it really just depends on what you want to achieve as an organization and what your company's doing today. And so it's best maybe to talk about your COO team, your operations officer, or a change management team that you might have, what kinds of things they use, because since we're communicating to executives, these are the kind of things that they can consume. They can understand these because it leads into big picture, but it's not necessarily something to manage the day-to-day of the things you're going to be doing and delivering. Good so far?
Yeah, I think something too that's interesting and is just like a very common theme is as a sales enablement leader, focusing on what's the most important, right? And focusing on when we focus on what's most important, we're able to really reevaluate what we're doing and what our current processes are to accomplish that task. And so I think that's something interesting. I don't know if we're going to get into it or what, but I would love to hear like, how do you figure out what's most important as a sales enablement leader? You know, we've got all these tools and resources and trainings and all this great stuff, but how do we identify what should be our priority?
And that's a great question. It really comes from our executive sponsor, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in detail, but it's good to maybe leave this up a bit because the wildly important matters most to your executive sponsor. And let's click into that because that executive sponsor could be your head of sales, as we saw, that was the most common that came up. Head of marketing could be head of operations, but it's about where they want you to go for their benefit. The most wildly important, the biggest goal isn't necessarily people completing courses or going through onboarding as fast as possible. It's about those business goals that could be things like driving additional revenue through upsell, acquiring new customers, retaining our customers, reducing churn of the sales team, improving effectiveness of the sales team, because we need the sales team to sell a bit more, either higher quota or they've got a broader portfolio of products and services that they need to sell. And so get to that level of specificity that lets you break down that business goal for that executive sponsor into the different programs. Now, I put this out here because I think we've all heard SMART goals are great. These are things that you want to have not at the charter level, but you want to have this at your project level. So as we go out, if we need to instill a new sales process because our sales forecasting is causing a lot of flux, that's the biggest challenge there. And this is where we do things like MedPick or Medic to improve our forecasting, have a project around there about what's your specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound components for that project. The goal there would be, how do we improve revenue forecast accuracy? Because that flux is impacting the business and the business strategy. So that would be one, again, talking to your constituents and talking to your personas. Have those surveys and assessments that you can come back and say, look, we've got all these different viewpoints, but here's the things I think that we're hearing most frequently that have the biggest impact on the benefit on the business. And so what I've done in the past, I'll walk through one of those examples of how I've talked to different executive sponsors, because even though I report up into our COO here, in the past I've reported to the CRO, but I've always tried to think of myself unofficially dotted line to all these other departments: CMO, product marketing, business operations, and HR, because I need their contributions to help build an enablement program, and I know they're going to get some benefits. For example, HR is often overthought of when it comes to an enablement program. They have challenges there in talent retention and talent acquisition. So I want to understand why that is. It doesn't just have to do with lack of performance. It could be lack of tools or lack of ways to be successful for the sales team. So make sure we incorporate some of their needs as we build this framework. So the best thing to do is start surveying and asking about some of those real key goals that they have, that you can break down into a sub goal that you can achieve if you're able to form the right team, not necessarily hire the right team, but recruit from a lot of other departments, and then demonstrate the value to these other departments about how we're showing content effectiveness to the marketing team, how we're showing effectiveness and efficiency to the head of sales, the chief operating officer, how we're improving our metrics with business operations and what they're measuring. And then again, just the culture and improving onboarding and ramp and increasing retention and reducing the friction of talent acquisition with HR. And so in thinking about all your different constituents, these are just some of mine I use here at Showpad, some great friendly faces. Start framing this out. And this is kind of that draft of a charter as you start componentizing who are the beneficiaries of enablement and thinking mentally, how do we prioritize all of these in terms of what's most important? And this is one of the harder parts in terms of where do we want to focus on. That sponsor is going to be critical, because if you report to marketing, they're your head sponsor, they're probably going to care more about brand messaging, leveraging content, and getting lead conversion through demand gen activities and events. But sales can be a beneficiary as well. And it's easy to do too much. So we want to try to maybe see, are there tangential things we can tackle to benefit sales, maybe with readiness and effectiveness, that we can benefit HR with talent acquisition or talent ramp, that we can help benefit sales operations in terms of having better forward view metrics that we know are going to result in improved rear view metrics. And when I say that, rear view metrics are all about things that already happen, pipeline and forecast. Our forward view metrics are things that are going to help us improve pipeline and forecast, like sales ramp time, sales knowledge, sales skill.
So just kind of a few questions, and I just want to back up just a smidge. The personas that we've identified, they're not all inclusive,
Not at all.
Perfect. Because I think that's something, and I just want to emphasize for our attendees, is that this is what's worked for Russell, and this is what has been successful for him and some of his examples. Your sponsors could be from any part of your company, really. I'm sure as long as it's kind of generating revenue and focused on that. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. And again, I'm showing the big picture because as you hit norming, performing, you're really starting to dig deep into those personas. But since a majority of our audience here is forming and storming, I would highly suggest pick and hone in on one, maybe two personas and really show value there, but also show that there's a future state there for other personas that you want to try to target. They're under consideration. They just can't be a focus or a priority right now.
Yeah.
That's going to let them know you're investing in that early stage foundational things, as we talked about those stages of group formation. The ultimate goal is for the entire company, the entire team to win by driving revenue. But we can't do that by trying to fix everything at once. So as you form those personas, again, think about those people that have that propensity to have that business benefit and start small. And don't try to grow too big too fast, because otherwise it's just death by a thousand cuts of folks that everybody is going to want everything. So yeah, as you're starting, forming, storming, absolutely think about one sponsor and maybe one advisor, one person that's going to have some tangential benefits. But again, the thing to start with as we think about this, it's easiest to start with sales and marketing. Marketing's typically, they've got access to budget, they spend and invest in the past. Sales gets a lot of the benefits. So honing in on those two is probably key if you're at that forming, storming stage. In some cases, you might just be able to focus on some of the HR benefits, but I would say absolutely try to at least start with one of those two as the primary charter and sponsor, showing some of those benefits to the other group.
Well, and it's interesting too, because like I said at the beginning, the common theme for this whole process seems to be focusing in on one or two things, whether we're looking at our charter or starting the process of building a charter, correct? And so it's been interesting, and I'm sure everyone else has hopefully noticed this as well, as we focus on the one or two sponsors to focus on, as we focus on the one or two things that our charter should really emphasize and put more resources towards. I think it's interesting that it's really taking everything that we do. And if we look at our jobs in sales enablement, we see all the stuff that we have and all these resources and tools and figuring out and identifying what's like the key. It's just, I think it's really interesting to see that. Now, I would be curious though, as we are building the sales enablement charter, and I think you mentioned this earlier, it's beneficial to consider who we bring on as our first sponsors, because our goals need to be aligned with theirs oftentimes. Is that right?
Actually, yeah, slight nuance to the phraseology there. Their goals are our goals. So my goal as an enablement practitioner, it's really to serve whoever is sponsoring this. It may be who I work for, but it could be that I was hired by marketing to help sales. Okay, let's make sure we negotiate what success looks like there. And that's really a challenge for sales, or for sales enablement, as you're negotiating success. And so I'm kind of showing everything that's possible, but not everything you need to jump in and do at those early stages. So what we can talk about next are what some of those enablement programs are. And there's a lot of details out there. Again, what I'm showing on this slide, I'm going to pause here, because if you're at that forming and storming stage, this is going to be a lot. And so think about, again, one, maybe two programs that you might want to jump into here and really do well, and know that the business goal that you have for your sponsor, of whatever that is, that we need to increase pipeline, we need to increase first deal time, ramp effectiveness. Talk to those two constituents that you have in marketing and sales and think about, where do I focus most? Is it onboarding? Is it sales processes, like doing things like MEDDIC and MEDPIC? My forecasting methodology, how do I execute and what do I do at each stage? Sales methodology, that's just more about the techniques. We'll talk more about these two things a little bit later for those that don't know. Or just ongoing competencies around knowledge, skill, and certification. And then change management. Again, we're going to talk a little bit deeper about each of these areas. But again, at that early stage in building your charter, probably only have one or two of these as your key primary focus, knowing that you've got one or two others in a future state under consideration, but you've got to build a foundation somewhere. And so again, depending on the state of your company, you may not be doing a lot of onboarding right now if you're not in a place where you're hiring and growing. And that's a good opportunity to think about sales process. Do we need to institute some change there to get more efficiency and more effectiveness out of executing our forecast methodology or our forecast process? Do we need to improve our methodology because we've got new messaging and new competition? We got to think about storytelling, objection handling, and messaging. And so I'm going to go a little bit deeper on each of these, but one trap I'm going to highlight before we dive deep into these programs and some of the measures is something on measures. I heard this from an advisor a while ago, is that we don't just improve what we're measuring. We've got to try to measure what we want to improve. And what we mean by this is it's very easy, to measure things like surveys and other data points that we can then try to improve and create better experiences for some of these live Zoom sessions and WebEx sessions we're doing. And the sales surveys are great, but if all we're doing is improving sales satisfaction over activities, we're not really generating the results we need. We need to start measuring what we want to improve. And that's where having that goal and working backwards towards how do we get there is going to be important. And we're going to talk about this through sales process and methodology and knowledge and skill in just a bit. But those are the things that are really tricky to measure, but these are areas we want to improve. And again, for folks that are very early stage in that forming, storming stage, just pick one or two of these things. This can be overwhelming. We're not trying to do that. We just want to show the big picture and be able to dive a little bit deeper. Does that work, Katie?
That's perfect. Absolutely.
So a lot of talk about process and methodology, and oftentimes these things get a little bit commingled. So there's no clear definition here of this. There's definitely some good blogs that are out there, but here's something I've just put together and summarized. And again, screenshot this, you'll have the slides later, but think about your sales process is both how does your buyer buy, their buying journey, and then how does your sales team sell? What stages do they have aligned to your CRM that helps with forecasting? For each of those, there's clear steps and stages. Your sales activities and your customer verifiable outcomes. How do you manage that activity and workflow at each of those stages? What's your opportunity pipeline and forecast? These are the outcomes of having a good process to be able to do that deal and opportunity qualification. Like I said, with MEDDIC and MEDDPICC. And if you haven't heard of MEDDIC and MEDDPICC before now, I definitely take a look at that, because if you want to start with sales process and you're still at that early stage of your sales enablement charter, those are great ways to talk and think about your process, because that can lead into improvements later in messaging, methodology, readiness. So there's a lot of great articles and content out there for MEDDIC and MEDDPICC, and a lot of great sales methodology consulting companies that provide support there. But here with process, we're measuring a lot through our systems and through our reporting, because a lot of these are activity-based, so we can see our effectiveness there. Methodology gets a little bit trickier, because these are sales methods that the team uses, their skills and techniques and how they apply knowledge. So these are things that we measure through evaluation and observation. So Katie, these would be things like, how do I build rapport? How do I have that first good hook with my email or my phone call? What kinds of things do I do in terms of making sure my message has resonance, that I've got a request and I'm able to get your response? So a lot of great techniques out there. These are things, again, that we can put out there and we exercise through to make sure that the sales team is good, but there's different methodologies and different things to apply at different stages with different personas. So again, as part of your charter, think about how you'd want to break down some of your programs and activities to fit one of these two key areas. Next, we're going to talk about knowledge and skill. And again, a lot of definition here. There's a lot of great industry knowledge about talent development that focuses on this, but think of knowledge as more factual based. These are things about the company, the portfolio and products, the solutions and positioning. If you're just starting off in enablement, this is a fantastic way to get going, because you can measure whether the team knows this or not. You build e-learning, you have the curriculum, you can put out the quizzes and tests and certification to ensure that we've got people that do know this. They're aware, they're able to apply it. The skill is a little bit trickier. This is where we've got to do those sales techniques, and methodology helps with discovery, storytelling, objection handling, negotiation, active listening, communication. All of these are those more soft skills for sales, and enabling these are a little bit trickier. You've got to have that foundation of a good process and methodology first, some of that knowledge, before you try to jump in and improve some of these skills. However, if you're a practitioner, if you're an expert practitioner and you're jumping in at one of these companies, they may want you to start focusing in on one of these areas. Maybe your win-loss is pretty low and you need to improve that. That's where objection handling and negotiation might come in, because that's that metric you want to improve tied to that charter. So a lot of these that tie together, we didn't go into that level of depth here. We certainly could in a future webinar, but as you're building your charter and thinking about this, we're kind of just showing you different things you can connect to show that big business impact. Next, we're going to talk about changes. Like, this is something that occurs that we don't think about enough, because sales is always dealing with change. And I try to summarize some of the change that's going on here, and it's our job in enablement to help manage this change and how we deliver it to the sales team. Because there's always changes in the products with new messaging, new solutions, and new services. There could be a new geo as people, or as the company expands into new geographies. They're expanding into new markets, or the market changes because of changing personas, changing buyers. We've got new messaging, so marketing is always trying to come up with new branding, subtle changes to branding or new messaging. There's changes to the competition that might have new capabilities, or new competitors are entering in the market. And then changing on value, how pricing might change, or how customers perceive the value of your solution. So this is more of the advanced thinking as we're getting more to the advanced sales stages of maturity. Think about how do we handle all this change in an organization. Again, think about if you're just starting out, one or two of these, how that might tie back into process and methodology, knowledge and skill. Talk to marketing, talk to sales, think about inventory, and maybe take some of these to them and talk about where's their biggest gap and where do they see the biggest issue with hitting the targets that they need to hit.
Well, and I think something too, as we've kind of gone over a little bit, that we have a lot of people in the early stages, which is awesome. Glad you're here. But I think something to kind of emphasize is this charter is not just a document, right? It's not just this piece of paper that has like processes, best practices, but it really should become an integral part of your sales enablement team, right? It needs to be what you rely on to help build these sales teams and managers for success, right?
Yeah, and part of showing, Katie, where you're at and where you're trying to go, you can inventory some of these things and talk about what we're doing now, what we're going to do later, and what we can't do now. Because the one thing I've seen as I build some of these charters, you're always going to have somebody say, hey, have you considered this? And so what we have to show with this complete view is, yes, we've considered all of these things in different dimensions. Again, you don't have to take all of them to your head of sales or head of marketing. Take the ones you know that they're probably going to bring up and say, yes, I've considered that, but that's going to be harder for us to deliver and not as much impact versus some of these other areas that are easier for us to deliver and have a greater impact. And that's going to be that balance in terms of trying to orchestrate that information amongst different teams and negotiating success.
Well, and I think too, something for those of you who are beginning to build this charter, and I'm sure talk with any of the more tenured charter gurus, I guess, don't be afraid of this. I know we've gone over a lot of information, but it's all stuff that you are probably already doing, but you just haven't put pen to paper yet. And I think one of the coolest things about this is that you're able to understand why you're doing what you're doing, what value it brings to the company, what you're trying to accomplish with it. So don't be worried about, oh my gosh, this is a lot of information. I've got to do all these things. I listened to Russell and now I'm having an anxiety attack and I just don't know what to do. Like, don't worry about that. Look at it instead as a great opportunity for you to reevaluate what's working, what's not working, where you can put a bigger emphasis because it aligns with what your goals are, and figure out what you can put less emphasis on. And honestly, I think you'll be really surprised. I'm excited to hear how so many of you are going to be implementing this after. So please email us and let us know. But I think that's something that everyone needs to remember too, is there's a lot, but it's a lot of stuff you're probably already doing. You just haven't written it out on a formal document yet. So keep that in mind as we're kind of continuing to go through this.
Yeah, and the last two slides here to think about, after you have your charter, have two ways of reporting out what you're doing. And I use the concept, again, keeping our sports theme, the scorecards versus scoreboard. So the scorecards are really just those leading indicators of knowledge, skill, and activity. And again, we're making our best guess here. Nobody knows for sure if we do some of these things like onboarding activities, role play exercises, discovery sessions, stand and deliver storytelling. Our job in the charter is to say, look, we've looked at everything. This is the bets we're going to make. We've got the sponsor supporting that. Our scorecard is going to tell us the outcomes of those activities and programs. Now we need to see in a month and a quarter, is that driving results on the scoreboard? And so trying to drive that correlation, that's where having a good partnership, depending on the maturity of a business operations team and the business intelligence team, you could do those things. But I try to separate these two things out, that the scoreboard is ultimately what the executives are looking at with pipeline, forecast, and revenue. It's good to talk in those terms, but it's always tough to get attribution to our enablement activities. And that's where a scorecard is very helpful to get those leading indicators that these are the things we agreed upon in the charter that we're going to measure, that we believe collectively in enablement with our executive sponsor will drive a better performance on the scoreboard. So last slide here, because I know we've got a few minutes left here. So next steps, again, taking all this information, again, just take it with a grain of salt. I'd say just start with creating your draft. Start very simple. Again, talk to your executive sponsor, find out what's that format of tool that they like to use. Whatever that is, try to best align to that. Think about some of those formats. I gave you some with V2MOM, 4DX, OKR, a lot of analogies that are out there, many, many more. Or ask people in the sales hacker community and other communities if they've got a template that they like, so you can kind of get a sense of it. One thing that definitely helps is taking a look at a lot. If you've never done this before, just asking for people that might share a blank template with you. So that way they can share some examples of how they communicate. Because sometimes if it's a brand new function, your leaders don't know how they want to consume this information. But I found I'm always successful with executives if I get shorter interview cycles with them than one large session. They've got a lot of things to do to run the business, to manage people, manage the teams, manage budgets. So doing 2 30-minute reviews are better than 1 60-minute review. So try to do that where you have some frequent small touch points and you're just consistently communicating this out, and realizing that sometimes you have to have that scheduled meeting to force that review, where you can, even though you can publish this and communicate this on your intranet site or a shared drive, you really want to make sure that you're evangelizing that and that you assess how you're performing with those scorecards and scoreboards and updating quarterly. And last, a couple other things, align that charter to a project plan. This is where when you run one of these programs, you're going to want to start and a finish, whereas the charter is more that ongoing thing that doesn't change much. But your project plans with all those starts and finishes, this is where the SMART goals come in. You may want to use your favorite SaaS tool like an Asana, Trello, Monday, or just a Cloud Doc. It could be a Google Slides or Word document that'll help you know who's doing what by when to deliver some of the results here, and then how you're going to measure success. But the metrics from those project plans should roll up in the metrics of your charter. And last, most importantly, just progress over perfection. So when in doubt, try to address that biggest friction point. I've kind of given an inventory of a lot of things you could focus on when thinking about sales enablement and all the different programs. So your best guess is a really good guess, because if you've talked to your head of marketing, you've talked to your head of sales, they may not have the exact answer for you. Make that guess, let them know with confidence, this is what is going to have the biggest impact with our most effective efforts that we can achieve results in, and start running with that.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely phenomenal. I know we've gone over so much today, from understanding where we're at in this idea of building the sales enablement charter, and understanding at every single one of those steps what we need to accomplish to get to that next step, whether it's getting a sponsor at the very beginning to and identify that there is a problem, to starting to lay out what this template's going to look like and where our priorities are going to be, to starting to take actions, all the way to how do we measure the success of these actions, understanding what this really looks like in real time. And also, how do we talk with our executive sponsors? How do we get an executive sponsor for this, so that our sales enablement teams can be as successful as possible? I know we've only got about 2 minutes or so, but just to wrap up, for those of you that are still here, I would love to get maybe one solid piece of advice from you, Russell, for those that are starting their sales enablement charter process or trying to refine it. If you could just summarize everything in one piece of advice, what would that be?
I think just like the progress over perfection, fail fast. Nobody's expecting perfection out of the gate. So take that assessment after you've done, either surveys or interviews with different folks. Again, you start with sales and marketing as your executive sponsors to see where you can have that quick impact, but communicate what you're doing today and not doing today, but what you want to plan on doing in the long term, and make sure that you've got that alignment. That's going to be the biggest thing. And then leverage your sponsor. Because a lot of times, again, we have a lot of accountability, but not a lot of authority in enablement. So leverage your sponsor to drive people to collaborate, to build the messaging, build the curriculum, build the framework. Don't be afraid to ghostwrite an email for them that they could send out to encourage that adoption. People attend the meetings, join the Slack groups, contribute to the project and the plan. It's not about using the stick. It's a little bit about using the carrot. So that's where the executive sponsor can be very, very powerful. It's just being that voice of things that you're trying to deliver on their behalf that's going to benefit them and ultimately benefit you.
I love it. That's great. Well, everyone, we are right at time. Russell, you did a fabulous job. So much great, amazing information, practical information. If people want to ask you questions, how do we get a hold of you, Russell?
Find me in a lot of these communities, LinkedIn or on Twitter. And again, hope this was helpful just based on a lot of conversations I've had with a lot of people that have been in your position. So this is hard. This is a very emerging marketplace in terms of sales enablement practitioners. That's why there's a lot of communities that have popped up to support it. Really appreciate Sales Hacker and everything you guys do for the community. It's been great. And again, you're not going it alone at your company or in the broader industry. There's lots of people that can help and willing to help. So definitely ask for that. And again, don't be afraid to ask internally. That's the other thing. Oftentimes we get intimidated to ask our friends, in sales or marketing or others for contributions. So I'm happy to help with some of those tips and make sure that we've got our statements and charters that help show the impact to other departments. So happy to help on that front as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This has been a great use of our time. I'm really excited for everything we learned today. Obviously, our attendees really love it as well. Thank you, Brian, and everyone else who's attended. Once again, this is going to be sent within 24 hours. You can also find it at saleshacker.com under training and events, and also on YouTube. And once again, thank you, Russell. Thank you, Showpad. This was completely invaluable content. So I'm so excited to have been a part of this with you all. And for that, I will say, have a fabulous afternoon, everyone.